I will, for the rest of my life, never forget where we met for the first time in person physically. It was at the steps of the Oval Office, right before we walked in to speak with the President of the United States.
Yes. Great place to meet.
So there's a backstory to that. The backstory is that our common friend, Scott Atlas, had been selected by the President of the United States, President Trump, to be his COVID advisor. Scott was quite frustrated that he was unable to convince or even really engage with Deborah Birx and Tony Fauci on the scientific basis for not putting lockdowns in place, the scientific basis for focused protection, the scientific basis for keeping the schools open. And his plan was to try to get a group of experts in front of the president. He called me and said, Jay, do you know any experts? He and I had become friends by this time. I think in July 2020, he called me and said, Jay, do you know any people who that the president ought to meet? And I immediately thought of you, Martin, thanks to Twitter. So despite the blacklist, it didn't work. I had learned about you at least. That led then, I think, Scott called you? How did that happen? He must have called you out of the blue.
Yes, so I never met Scott before either, but we talked on the phone a few times before the meeting at the White House. I think he felt very lonely in the White House. He clearly was very much following the basic principles of public health, and he wanted to know exactly what was going on with this virus and what are the best ways to do it. And I think he had his ideas were right on the money. But sometimes he wanted to discuss like a scientific paper that came out and get a different or a complementary perspective on it. So he would sometimes call and discuss some paper because he was really into the science of this, which I think he was frustrated that Anthony Fauci and Deborah Birx sort of ignored the scientific facts that was coming out there.
I mean, that was my experience with Scott, too. We discussed paper after paper after paper. Of course, for scientists, it was a very exciting time. How many times in the life of an epidemiologist do you have a new disease of note that you get to track and learn about? I mean, it's a sad thing for many people, but it's also for scientists, it's an opportunity to learn and use the scientific method for the public good. And I think that's how Scott was thinking about this at the time.
I mean, sure, from a scientific perspective, infectious diseases are fascinating.
Yeah.
They can be deadly, so in that sense, they're pretty awful. But in terms of how they spread, it's very interesting conceptually and so how that operates.
But for Scott, and I think for me and you, I know for both of us that it wasn't just a theoretical exercise. The reason to read these scientific papers was to make better decisions about how to protect human life.
Exactly. So it was very, very important. And of course, as a scientist, then you try to help as in any way you can. So if Scott called, of course, I will spend all the time necessary to help him in a way possible.
All right, so we end up in the Oval Office. I remember that. I will never, to the end of my life, forget that. We were supposed to spend 5 minutes there with President Trump, but he kept asking us questions. What did he ask you, Martin? What did you tell him?
So he asked very good questions. We talked about testing, for example, and that it's important to do testing in nursing homes of not just the patients, but the caretakers, the staff, to avoid, to minimize the risk of the infection coming into nursing homes. At the same time, it's useless to test students in universities. So it was a very good conversation. I guess the one I remember the best is the one where I contradicted the president. He asked, well, I didn't really contradict, but he asked me, so I heard that Sweden is doing really poorly, because that's what people have been telling him. So I had to say, no, Sweden is actually doing very well. They're not locking down. And in terms of the COVID, they're doing very well. Kids, the schools are open and the kids are doing great. So So I think the president found it interesting to get a perspective that was different from what he sort of heard through the official channels.